The Intertestamental Period, 400 years of silence. The Old Testament is an essential part of the Christian Bible because with the New Testament, this book forms one record of God's progressive revelation of who He is and His redemptive plan. We also have to remember that the Old Testament was the Bible for the early church before the New Testament canon was formed. Nearly 1/3 of the New Testament is comprised of Old Testament scriptures, quotes, and allusions. God's grand design for deliverance and victory over sin and death is revealed ultimately in the New Testament. Yahweh will institute a new relationship with humanity in the New Testament, and the new relationship is centered in the person of Jesus Christ. There were approximately 400 years between the last prophecy and the birth of Jesus Christ. This time is known as the silent years, but these years would prove crucial to laying the foundation culturally, politically, and even spiritually for Jesus to come to this world and live among us. Paul referred to this as the fullness of time. During this time, the rise of the Hellenistic Empire took place. Alexander the Great had a passion to Hellenize the entire world, which would have included Judah. During these years, God used what was happening in the world, the creating of one culture and one language, Greek, to make it possible for the eventual preaching of the gospel. God also utilized the building of civilization by Rome, the creating of roads and seaports, to be able to reach the greater world with the good news of the gospel through later missionaries like Paul. What is Hellenism? Hellenism is basically Greek culture. When the Jews returned from exile in Babylon, they wanted to preserve and protect their national identity as people of the law. Those who were superbly conservative were, with regard to this preservation of national identity as opposed to Greek culture, were known as Pharisees. Alexander the Great, about 100 years after the Jews had returned, extended his territory, which included Judah. Some who accepted this Greek culture into the mainstream of life were among the wealthy and from the aristocracy of Jewish society, and they were the Sadducees. The Greek language became the language to know and to speak. The laws of the land reflected the laws of the Greeks over the law of Moses. So Hellenism, or this Greek culture, became a real dominating thing in the lives of the Jews, as well as the rest of this part of the world. These two groups, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, will play a greater role later on in the biblical story. When Alexander died at an early age of 32, the empire was divided into 4 parts: Greece, Asia Minor, and 2 other parts that directly affected the Jews were given to General Ptolemy, who took control of Egypt, including Palestine, and General Seleucus, who established Syria. Palestine was under the reign of the Ptolemies, and it was relatively quiet, yet disputed territory. Then, in 198 BCE, the Seleucid king Antiochus III overwhelmed the Ptolemies, and Palestine ended up in the hands of the Seleucids. When Palestine was under the Ptolemies, many Jews accepted the way of life and the culture of the Greeks. It wasn't all bad. In fact, it was during this time that the Old Testament was translated into Greek, and that is known as the Septuagint. Those living in Palestine, as well as Jews living outside of Palestine, known as the diaspora, absorbed Greek culture and influence into their daily lives. There were still those, however, that kept protecting their faith and culture from any outside sources. When Palestine came under the Seleucid rule, Antiochus III was kind to the Jewish people. However, when his son Antiochus IV Epiphanes took over, he made it very difficult for the Jews, wanting to indoctrinate them fully into Greek culture by worshiping other gods. He defiled the temple by erecting an altar to Zeus and took control over Jerusalem. He banned the practice of Jewish faith, including all festivals, Sabbath, and even circumcision. There was still a small remnant of those who were completely loyal to Jewish faith, Hasidim. And you can continue to see how this lineage of David is still very thin. So much happening to this royal line of David since David left the scene back in 1000 BC or so. This small group of resistors wanted to do away with the influx of Greek culture and began to rebel against Antiochus Epiphanes' laws. Some of them formed a group of freedom fighters and through guerrilla warfare came against the Greek army. Judas Maccabeus became the eventual leader of this band of zealots, and their resistance was known as the Maccabean War. In the process, they cleansed the temple from all pagan idols and rededicated the temple in 164 BCE. The Jewish festival Hanukkah, Festival of Lights, is in memory of the Maccabean revolt over the Greeks. As a result of this war, all but the younger brother of Judas Maccabeus had died. However, the nation of the Jewish people was once again unified and free from the Greek powers under the success of his brother Simon. This begins what is known as the Hasmonean Dynasty. Simon was the high priest, commander-in-chief, and the governor of the Jews. This dynasty was an independent Jewish kingdom that ruled Judah from 142 to 63 BC. Simon entered into a treaty with Rome, which was at first a good thing in that Rome gave the Jews protection they needed. Yet, once again, internal feuding within the dynasty broke out and the Hasmoneans failed to really maintain control over the independent nation. During this feud, or civil war, over who would reign and rule over Judah, with the Hasmoneans, the Romans came under the leadership of Pompey, who took the region himself and made Palestine part of the Roman Empire. The independent kingdom of the Jews came to an end and was now under the Roman authority in 63 BCE. In 37 BCE, Herod the Great became appointed by the Roman Senate as the king of the Jews. Loyal to Rome politically and very Greek in his culture, he was known for his massive building projects. One of the most important cities that he built was Caesarea, which was on the Mediterranean coast. He also restored the temple, an initial 10-year project that began in 19 BC, but wasn't totally completed until AD 64. 6 years later, in AD 70, Rome would destroy the temple. All that is left today is the western wall of that facility known as the Wailing Wall. Before Herod died in 4 BCE, he named his successors, Antipas and Archelaus, sons by a Samaritan wife, and Philip, son of a Jerusalem woman. It was Antipas that ruled over the Galilee from 4 BCE to AD 39. It would one day be Antipas that Jesus would stand before prior to crucifixion. Archelaus, ruling from 4 BC to AD 6, received Judea and Samaria. Philip, ruling 4 BCE to AD 34, received the territory in which he built Caesarea Philippi. After Philip died, Caligula, Roman emperor, gave his territory to Herod Agrippa, grandson of Herod the Great. Because of his ruthless antics, the territory governed by Archelaus, Herod's son, was put under the authority of a Roman governor who was in charge of keeping the peace and collecting the taxes. Pilate, AD 26 to 36, was governor over Judea and Samaria. Antipas's territory was also ripped from him because of insubordination, and the area of the Galilee was up under the rule of Herod Agrippa. Later in AD 41, the entire region of Judea and Samaria was added to his rule, and he governed it until AD 44. Herod Agrippa controlled now all of the area that Herod the Great had. His son, Herod Agrippa II, followed him as king. So by the time the New Testament begins, we have the Pharisees, the Sadducees, Essenes, and the Zealots. These are not only religious groups within Judaism, but they are political groups. We also have scribes who are like lawyers of religious law. They hang out a lot with the Pharisees, who are the most conservative group interested in maintaining the law of Moses and keeping with Torah. Local worship within the synagogue has also developed, even though there is the temple. You also have rabbis who are teachers and tax collectors, now demanding money to support Rome. Most of the Jewish population are farmers and peasants. We will learn more about the culture of first century Palestine a little later on. All of this to say that the world that Jesus entered was a very different world than we left off 400 years ago. Because of the Roman occupation and development the development of Greek culture, we have one language, we have Roman roads that allow for greater travel, we have seaports in which trade can take place, and we have these huge cities built by Herod the Great that offer bustling enterprises. From AD 6 to 66, the entire region of Judea was under the rule of 14 governors who administered with a heavy hand, demanding the burden of high taxes and punishing anyone who got in their way. The Jewish people became very resentful and began to rise up under the leadership of Judas the Galilean and the Zealots. Fighting continued until the Roman army entered Jerusalem, sacking the temple in AD 70, with thousands of Jews killed. The Zealots took refuge at the fortress Masada. After a 3-year siege, the Romans broke through the fortress walls, discovering that the freedom fighters took their own lives rather than surrendering or being killed by the Romans. The temple would never be restored or rebuilt again. This is the history of the beginning of the first century and the backdrop to the time of Jesus' life and earthly ministry, as well as the beginning of the church on the day of Pentecost.